Okay, who am I? I'm not going to read it other than to say I'm fascinated by the predictability of humans, and there's a bit of a story in that aligned to mathematics. And also I've been advised to put up a health warning, Mark, about there is 2 formulas, but there's also a lot of old stuff. So there's a lot of old stuff in this one. First things first, bit of a recap on what data exfiltration is. It is where a document is being leaked from a place to another place, possibly through a network edge device, and quite often documents that you may want to have some control over. Covert exfiltration, by equivalent, is the transmission of the same documents, but actually you're not allowed to. So the no entry sign for FTP, no entry sign for FTP says you can't actually transmit it, but there are other mechanisms, and one of them being DNS. It's iodine, which is TCP over DNS, so file transfer protocol over TCP over DNS. And in its simplest form, a DNS lookup is made. So I've got a base 36 encoded message. It's a domain name that no one will recognize to transmit a message on the outside, and it's to a controlled DNS server, and the responses normally come back through text encoded fields. So that tends to be how it's done. Data leakage protection is normally through some kind of proxy. And in that particular case, data is deposited onto the inspection proxy. Quite often, if there's encryption involved, the inspection proxy will then represent the individual the individual that is transmitting the data through what I've referred to as a God key. There's a number of problems with this. One of them is confidentiality. It breaks all kinds of protocols, and the other one is it really messes with any form of authentication that uses certificates, because effectively the certificates aren't being passed through. There are ways around that, but effectively that causes a bit of a problem. So my question was, is there another way? So first point of call, and that is deliberately sort of obscured, that is a Wireshark dump of a conversation between my PC and the BBC website, and it's basically a background push notification. You can see you've got things, in this particular case, I've set the timing to be microseconds, the inter-packet arrival time, because it's a good one to work with. You've also got source IP address, destination IP address, and then you've got packet lengths. There's a lot more of it, and I assure you it starts to get into a bit of a drumbeat. So there is a rhythm there, but for all intents and purposes, there doesn't appear on the face of it to be a lot of useful information. I then introduced, and I have to stare at this because I can never remember this guy's name, Stefan Birschka, who produced an absolutely incredible talk. I did say there was some old stuff back in 2011 at the Berlin Chaos Conference. I've always wanted to go, but I've got kids, so it's always a problem because it occurs between Christmas and New Year, which is not a good time. Anyway, basically what he said was the human ear is an incredible thing because it effectively performs Fourier transforms. That's how we recognize things. It's a really, really cool approach. And what he did was he's got a talk that starts off with the premise that you should be thinking somewhat outside the box. And what he's looking to do is to detect a specific sequence of a particular message, even though it's actually encrypted in a Skype packet. And he does it by looking at timing. So he looks at effectively the inter-arrival time of a packet, and he also includes the packet sizes. There are ways to defeat it, and there's lots of encryption systems where you actually pad the packets out. But for all intents and purposes, Skype doesn't do that. What's also quite interesting, one of his research students, and again I'm going to have to look at this because I can never remember how to pronounce it, Picatito, actually did a piece of research. One of the problems with the approach that was identified was you actually need context, you need the sentence. So what they've done is they aligned that to looking at file transfer protocols in this particular case. And to the keen eye, you'll notice that the graph on the left, which is effectively the percentage of packets and against the packet sizes. And what you'll notice if you look at the graph on the left and the right, they're very similar. And for the keen eye, there's roughly 100 bytes between the one on the left and the one on the right, which happens to be the encryption overhead. It's the overhead of the encryption packet. But the point is that even though that is ESP encrypted, the envelope looks the same, which is quite an interesting characteristic. At this point, I introduce a bit of I'm not going to say a hero of mine, but Cloud Shannon, father of information theory. He's particularly famous for juggling on a unicycle, but he was also a researcher and one of the chief engineers over at Bell Laboratories, and he's the responsibility for the noughts and ones. So he effectively turned around and gave information a quantity. He said there is a quantity of information in that, and here's a way of doing it, and it was doing it in bits. So this is what this did. So if you consider files are typically a byte in size, there are 8 bits of information in that file. There is the potential for 8 bits of information in that file. So one of the things that he was looking at was, how could I possibly transmit this efficiently? Well, if I allow for all files to be of 8 bits of entropy, that isn't going to take advantage of any efficiencies that could be achieved. And he created a concept or a calculation. Entropy, there's the first formula. And entropy is effectively the average utilization of each of the characters within the file. To make it slightly easier to get your head around this, what I've done is I've created a couple of bar charts. So first and foremost, there's a text file, which is literally the characters 0 to 9 and the A to Z in the order they appear on your keyboard. In this particular case, there are 5.2 bits of entropy. What that means is that to represent those 37 characters, and I say 37 because we've also got the carriage return on the end, 36 plus the carriage return, to represent those, we need roughly 5.2 bits of entropy to achieve that. So 2 to the power of 5.2 comes to roughly 37. It's not quite, but it's thereabouts. The other thing that I want to draw attention to, which I'll come back to later in the talk, is the efficiency. And in Shannon speak, if you will, each of those characters is what they refer to as a symbol. So they're characters, but he sees them as symbols. And you'll hear me talk a little bit about the efficiencies of symbol utilization, which is what we've got there. In that particular case, because of the way that I have used them in there, we're seeing an efficiency of 65%. So we are not making good efficient use of that symbol set. We can get slightly more efficient if I actually put all the way around my keyboard. So literally, I've gone all the way around my keyboard and all the printable characters. And in that particular case, you'll see over on the left-hand side of the bar chart, you'll see that the entropy has been pushed up to 6.4 or thereabouts, but also the efficiency has gone to 80% because we're making better use of the character set that we've been given or the symbols we've been given. And again, what will come up I've got a couple of other graphs just to show. It is also possible to by plotting a file or the order of the symbols in a file, it can be possible to detect the type of file that you're looking at just by looking at effectively this distribution. This one here is an audio file linking back to audio. Well, the reason it looks this way is because effectively, that's how audio looks like, because you get pluses and minuses. So that's why that looks that way. There's a little bit more data in there. It's slightly more efficient, 74.96%. And we're seeing that in this particular case, there's nearly 6 bits of entropy, 5.99. This is a 24-bit graphics file. And again, because it is encoded, it is somewhat more efficient, 97.9%. And this is pushing the envelope. So again, we're getting closer and closer to these 8 bits. So in this particular case, it's 7.8. I wasn't going to look over there anyway. A compressed file is by definition efficient. You take out all of the duplications. Therefore, we can see efficiency running at 99.99%. And the entropy is getting really, really close. And this time, it's 7.9993. It's getting really close. And if I then look at an encrypted file, no surprises that that's getting slightly further, but it is not much more. So how can we use this? How does Shannon use this? Morse code, but it's international Morse code, which is aligned to international English. it is an encoding system that is specifically designed to carry the English language. That's why the E and the T, which are the most frequently used characters, appear with the smallest amount of data to effectively deliver them, smallest amount of requirements in the encoding system to deliver them. Whereas Z, Y, X, and H, I think somewhere in there as well, they're all 4, which effectively means that they take more effort to encode them. So, going back to the entropy question, if I were to put another language through that had a different structure, then effectively it would be nowhere near as efficient, and we'd need a different Morse code to make it more efficient. Mathematicians too. These guys effectively, I have to read some more notes here, sorry about this. Kullback and Leibler provided a mechanism to look at the efficiency of, based on an encoding system. What they did was they said that if you have an encoding system that is optimized for a particular data transmission, how much more or less efficiently would that encoding system be used on another stream of data? So effectively, data stream Q, what we're saying here is that the probability of P given Q, it provides you a mechanism to compare the two. They're also founder members of, I'm trying to remember what the paper was called. So they also were founder scientists at the NSA, whereas at the NSA they were looking for alternative mechanisms for actually stripping out or identifying crypto, looking for keys and other things within data streams. To illustrate my point, and I hope this comes out, what I've done is I've gone back to the first 2 files and asked for the Kullback-Leibler divergence, which is effectively how more efficient would the encoding system be from one to another. And what we're saying here is, and again, it was no surprise, it became obvious from looking at the first 2 slides, that the additional entropy or the inefficiency is 1.185. So what we're saying here is that if you look at the amount of data, the amount of entropy that was required to transmit the first file, and then use an encoding system that was optimized for that, how much of an overhead, or how inefficient would it be? And that effectively provides us a calculation to deliver that. One of the problems with Kullback-Leibler is it's not reversible. So just because it would take an extra 1.185, 186 bits to transmit a smaller file over a more complex file doesn't necessarily mean it is minus 1.185. And I think if you reverse the calculation, it's about half a bit of entropy if the reverse applies. Because this is all about the encoding, it's about the efficiency of the character set within the encoding. So it's not quite the same. Okay, so going back to my the paper that I didn't mention at the beginning. Oops, sorry. The fourth mathematician that I want to introduce, a chap called George Ziff, who produces Ziff's law. Effectively, he identified that human beings typically, if you were to analyze letters, words that a human being has generated, you would find that the most common word appeared twice as often as the second most often. It doesn't make sense when you first think about it, but the problem is it's true. And to demonstrate this, some work was done, some research was done in 2015. Apologies, it was 2015 is the year most recent. In 2015, what someone did is they got all of the versions of Wikipedia, crunched the first 10 million words from all of them, and effectively on a log-log graph, which basically means instead of it being an exponential curve, it's nearly straight, just makes it easier to read. They plotted that, and they've shown that just is the case, which basically means we are predictable in what we do. Everything we do is, in that particular regard, it's totally predictable. And the paper that I glossed over right at the beginning, and I apologize, my nerves, Shannon effectively took hold of this particular aspect, and he provided a mechanism to predict what comes next in a sentence. Which is sort of where I got hooked with this whole thing all 20 odd years ago. It literally allows you to predict what is coming next. So what I'm saying is there a way that I can use that somehow? Going back to the original problem. Well, as it happens, For DNS tunnel detection, some research was done in 2004, and what they've actually done is they've shown that if you were to look at DNS names for these subdomains that have effectively totally untampered, so normal DNS names, they actually form the blue graph, which follows the Ziphian curve. Whereas in comparison, if you actually look at TCP over DNS or other forms of DNS tunneling mechanisms, you can actually see that the plot is almost flat. And the reason being is that encoding systems with encryption otherwise try to be as efficient as possible. So whereas us humans are inefficient with characters, encryption systems with encoding systems are very efficient. So I think, in essence, there is a strategy. I have another slide that I took out, which effectively shows that this technique has been used for detecting the likes of iodine, and has been used for detecting different types of exfiltration, covert exfiltration systems. So, which is quite neat. So I'll come back to my earlier question: is it possible to implement some kind of watermark? So my take on it is quite simple. If we were to apply a watermark of some description, let's call it a certificate, to a document, in all probability, no pun intended, we could detect the fact that the watermark is there. And the reason being is that the watermark is machine generated, and the certificates tend to have very high entropy, so that you're going to be able to see them. So the analogy I would see is that effectively you will see entropy moving at a certain rate, and you'll see a bump. The problem is that if that's being put through any form of encryption system or any encoding system that is efficient, by definition, you will harmonize that out. And that's sort of come to the end. Oh, I've got there already. Sorry, I've come to the end of what's it. Got a bit carried away. Any questions? And apologies if that's a bit of a mess. In something like a network sense? I'd like to think so, by virtue of the fact that the alternative is that either someone's got a spy on absolutely everything. I have a firm belief that I trust mathematics, I don't trust configuration. So to that end, I don't want someone reading the data. Part of the problem that I identified quite soon on is that if you're saying that the maximum entropy is available is 8, and what we're saying is that the envelope of the packet that's going through has an entropy of 7.99999. You don't really have a lot of space to tell that something else is going on or something that's in there. And that's part of the problem. So I think all the tools are there, but it's one of those things whereby in the present moment you have such a small element to play with, it becomes quite difficult. And I think that was my realization. I think part of my concern in that particular front is accuracy. You want to have a high level of certainty that you are seeing something and it's not an outlier or it's not some element. And I have a real problem with Bayes by virtue of the fact that one of the problems is that the principles of a lot of machine learning is that you're using a force-back model. So ultimately, you are going to make the same mistakes. So, but I'm not sure it's an accuracy problem. It's not a fact that I haven't seen this before or I've seen it a different way. It's actually about the accuracy. If there was a way, and another avenue of this, which I have started looking at, is to start to say, let's start looking at things like 16-bit and 32-bit entropy. One of the problems is they're quite hard to calculate because you've now got a really, really massive. If you bear in mind, if you're talking about 8-bit entropy, you're talking about 256 symbols. As soon as you suddenly go to 32-bit entropy, you're up to the billions. As soon as you go to 64-bit entropy, these are massive numbers. So to actually be able to calculate something and actually create yourself some definition. The example I hypothesized was if I come back after 6 months of processing and I still say I can only give you a sort of a 50-50 likelihood that this was there, I'm not really going to get thanked. They're going to go coin toss, much more accurate, much quicker. If that sort of makes sense.
I have a question. Really great talk. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it, but I think I might be biased because I'm a mathematician.
Thank you.
But really great. I was going to ask about speed and accuracy, and if you've tried, say, the Fourier approach or other ideas to try and pull out like almost other periodicities within data, within patterns that you find in inefficient, unencoded data.
The research that was done off the back of, and again, I can never remember his name, was Butashishki. And again, I would advocate, I'm more than happy to share the slides. Anyone that's get a chance to see that slide, the guy is brilliant. He quotes Sagan, think outside the box, don't go for which is pretty much what you're saying, Mark. Part of his issue is that a lot of these things are defeatable. So, for example, current encryption algorithms have weaknesses because their keys are of a certain size and so on and so forth. Therefore, you have periodicity that you can rely on. So there's only so much you can morph the traffic. But as soon as you start having clever packing mechanisms that are difficult to defeat, and packing mechanisms themselves are defeatable if you know what the algorithm is to do them, the problem is that each time you're up in the ante, but you still have this issue with effectively with accuracy. In his particular case, he was looking for speech. And he started off with the principle whereby I'm looking for this particular sequence of speech. Speech naturally forms. Therefore, if you encrypt it, you were going to struggle to lose that particular perspective. The only other thing I did look at, and again I've got loads more bits and pieces on, which was it possible to take a different approach for attacking a DNS to effectively defeat DNS encryption or DNS tunneling? And one of them is to turn around and say, if you can identify the timing associated with FTP, is it possible to effectively identify outliers or places where FTP is being misused for tunneling? So, for example, FTP is typically, you'll see a lot going in one direction, but not so much coming in the other direction. And you'll see other scenarios which may show through. The issue with a lot of these things is it's really, really cool for looking for modeling TCP-related things. As soon as you go into UDP, it becomes a real problem. It's very, very difficult to do because of caching and other things that go on.
Thank you.
Cool. Sorry. Was that okay? How was that pitched? Sorry, should I ask that question? How was that pitched? Was it, because I had a lot more maths in there because it's my passion. And I took a lot of maths out because I really want to share because I am so passionate about this subject and I wanted to make sure it was accessible to people. And how was that pitched? Was it okay? Thank you. Thank you.